Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall, and we're back again, back in the saddle, doing all the greatest hits of It Gets Weird, from dead dogs to dick jokes to probably at one point it was harassing Adam Sandler, but that stopped.
What's the term?
It's been retired. That bit
yes.
is that the Bits jersey has been put up in the rafters of the It Gets Weird Coliseum. Ever since Uncut Gems, it hasn't felt right to harass the man.
Yeah, and then I saw what's the one where he's like a little baby man? He's like a little baby guy.
Oh my god, I forgot about that movie.
You know the movie I'm talking about. It's like Baby Man. Adam Sandler stars as the baby man, or something like that. Uncut Gems was sort of like the realization that Adam Sandler could act in a serious role, in a good
for those
role.
of us who hadn't seen Punch Drunk Love.
Right. Well, yeah, I hadn't seen Punch. I still haven't seen Punch Drunk Love, actually.
Oh,
so maybe
go
I need
watch
to
Punch Drunk Love. It's really good.
I'll have to watch that. But then I watched Baby Man starring Adam Sandler, and I realized he could be funny too.
Yeah, he's a funny. He's not just a serious actor, Adam Sandler.
I don't know why I didn't pick like Big Daddy or whatever. Isn't that what that movie's called?
Yeah, Big Daddy's a movie.
What's that movie about? He becomes like is he like a stepdad? Is that what it is?
I have never seen Big Daddy, but I believe he is a dad who steps up. So
I saw it when I was very young, and the only thing I remember from that is like both him and this little kid like pee on a wall in a public place, and it's like, damn, they're like pissing.
Do they accidentally cross
stuff.
Streams and swap bodies? Oh wait, no, sorry. That's The Change Up, starring Ryan Reynolds and Jason Bateman.
Is that a real?
That is a real
plot?
movie.
Wow. Okay.
They're peeing in a wishing fountain, and they cross streams, and it causes them to cross bodies.
Sure. And that's why you never cross the streams, right? That's what that old adage is about. But yeah, Baby Man, he's sort of like a guy who's a baby, and he's sort of having to deal with that. Yeah. There's a lot of like, it's like Adam Sandler, but he's like in a diaper.
This sounds so much like a thing that 30 Rock would do when they got Adam Sandler to guest star as like the movie he's promoting.
Yeah.
It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, they put him in like a diaper, and like they try and give him a bink. There's a scene where they like try to give Adam Sandler as the baby man a binky, and he slaps it out of her hands. He's like, "Give me a Coors Light." In that sort of Adam Sandler voice that he does.
Well, you don't got any cold ones?
Yeah, he wants a brew. And that's sort of where the comedy comes from, is that sort of like, just that sort of distinction between being a man and being a baby is sort of the joke of it all.
Yeah, it's a lot of babies walk like this, and grown men walk like this kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's really exactly important. Right. It's exactly right. So that's where a lot of the comedy comes in. So, yeah, no, and I've been enjoying that, I guess, but
sounds like you've been enjoying it.
I did a game jam, so I apologize in advance. I did a 48-hour, basically I did a thing with a couple friends where it was like, in 48 hours, try and build a video game. And we did accomplish that, but after doing 2 straight days of that, like my brain feels a little bit like mush. It was a very cool and fun thing to do, but like my brain just is not here. So I apologize in advance if I suck shit this episode.
I got faith in you. I think that you're going to take us through the world of all the weird nonsense that you've decided to look into, and bring it home. Land that plane safely like a fucking professional.
Thank you. Yes,
like Sully Sullenberger himself.
Yeah, into the shopping mall at the Wetzel's Pretzels, where they have the best ice, which is a good comedy bang bang bit for those who have not seen the show. So, Niall. Right off the bat, we got an email.
Oh, fantastic.
This is an email from Turner, is their name. And the email title is Old UFO Sighting and Cousin Mentioned. And there's like an explosion emoji thing next to it.
Their cousin exploded?
Well, no. I think their cousin is still doing things. And I think you specifically are surprisingly familiar with their cousin. So.
Oh. Shit. Okay.
Let me read this to you. Hey guys, hope you find this email tasty as hell. I've been listening for a few years and I absolutely love the podcast. I was listening to The Whole House, and that's spelled HOLE instead of HULL as our sort of bit from that episode. So thank you for that. I mean Whole House episode, and my eyes literally popped out of my head like a cartoon when I heard you mention Adam Selzer and how a lot of the info for the episode came from his website, because he's my cousin. And it blew my mind hearing the name of a relative more than 400 episodes into one of my favorite podcasts. Just thought that was cool and wanted to share, but I figured if I was writing in, I should probably tell my one and only UFO encounter. So, one night sometime during the first half of 2017, my friends and I were driving down the road in Iowa, not a rural area, but a populated city in Des Moines. As we were pulling up to the stoplight, we saw what looked like a plane flying in our direction, but as we got closer, the perspective changed, and we realized it was a lot closer to us in the ground than we had thought. It also wasn't moving at all. As we tried to comprehend what was going on, we thought it might be a drone, but this thing didn't make a sound. It was just hovering above the trees, completely silent. It was hard to make out the shape and exact size because it was night, but it had white lights all around it with what looked like some green and red ones as well, but they weren't like separate lights. It seemed to be a solid ring of light, fluctuating with red and green within the main white. We just sat there looking at it. The stoplight turned green, but we didn't care. Nobody else was on the road, so we were the only ones witnessing this. Suddenly, it did a type of U-turn, but the way it did was it swooped quickly and snapped in the other direction, almost like a 180, without barely moving the vehicle. We continued driving home, hoping we could catch it above the trees we drove past. We didn't see anything, but when we ended up at my house, which is about 10 minutes in the direction the object flew from, where we saw it, I started to get out of my friend's car, and at the end of the street, we all saw the object in the sky zoom by at an insane speed. We all freaked out and drove towards where we saw it as fast as we could, but after circling the outside of my neighborhood, it was nowhere to be seen. When this happened, we all just thought it was strange and shrugged it off because there must have been some explanation. But now, after years of hearing other UFO encounters on podcasts and elsewhere, I made connections between my experience and others, and it's just too hard to deny the similarities, so I'm convinced it wasn't just a drone we saw this night. So keep up the great work. You're the only podcast I know to randomly bring up Evangelion, David Wayne, Doctor Who showrunners, and other niche or obscure things all at once. So thank you, Turner. That's a classic-sounding UFO scenario. Interesting. It's an interesting style of UFO encounter to have, I think, in 2017. I mean, like, my immediate assumption would be drone, frankly. But that's got some weird details that, like, I don't know what that might be. But I would start investigating what the local military bases look like around there.
You got to see where the military is, and you got to. I'm also just curious. I was born in West Des Moines, Iowa, so I'm very curious if I know where this person saw this UFO.
Wow, that's true.
It depends on which direction you go outside of Des Moines to get to where he has.
Sure.
But yeah, that's a classic UFO, and also shouts out to your cousin.
I was about to say,
definitely made doing research for that episode so much easier.
I looked up the cousin, and it seems that they're still doing like talks and investigations of Whole House and its history. So that's super cool. So shouts out, we appreciate it. I imagine
doing the Lord's work.
That was a good source for your episode. Um. Okay, Niall, you're gonna have to roll with me a little bit on this episode with what I looked into.
Okay.
It's. I mean, we haven't done episodes that are kind of like this too many times before. But it was perfect to have a great email about a UFO encounter for this episode, because I found this all started from me finding a document online that I thought was interesting, but was sort of covering a timeline of events with UFOs that I've been curious about for a while.
Okay.
And I thought it would spark a good discussion and give us more jumping off points for future discussions too. We've talked about some of this stuff before, but sometimes only brushing up on like various figures involved, or the projects get mentioned, or there's some certain specific incidents that happen. But sometimes these things really only get a brief mention.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to dig deeper into the CIA's involvement with the UFO phenomenon. A lot of our coverage in the past usually goes back to military intelligence, specifically the Air Force. That's what a lot of the coverage is. What's kind of interesting too about what I was finding is that like some of it seemed to be information drafted up by the FBI in some cases. Because like if you'll recall, the FBI at one point I think investigated the CIA, especially when like all of the like fallout from their secrecy in the early 70s, I think it was like 1972, that like it was coming out that things like MK Ultra existed, but that was just like one of like a whole myriad of issues that people had with the CIA and the sort of secrecy they had surrounding a bunch of shady shit they did. And so it got me thinking, like, what exactly does the CIA's, like, what is the CIA's actual stance on UFOs? We make a lot of like, we speculate sometimes, right? Where it's like the case that I always go back to is Villas Boas, which is like, there is some speculation from, you know, people more well-researched than me that like maybe what seems to have been an alien abduction case in the late 50s, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, may have had something to do with like CIA covert ops, psychological warfare shit.
Black helicopter type shit.
Yeah. So I was curious if there was like a good record of like, what was the CIA doing when UFO shit was like arguably at its height.
Okay.
So yeah, this is like a sort of long form explanation, but this is like, I guess like a little bit of a history, and like a couple weird ass incidents that I thought were interesting. And there's a lot, there's a lot of good reference points too for this episode, I imagine. So listeners, what I'd like to point you to, if you haven't heard them already, episodes 327 to 329, we sort of broadly cover the idea of this mass U.S. government cover-up of UFOs, and that's where we talk more, I think, about military intelligence, the Air Force, and the government, and how disinformation was spread about UFOs. We also talked about the disastrous program UFO Cover-Up Live in episode 349, and the great documentary about Richard Doty and UFO disinformation, Mirage Men, in episode 364, based off of, I think, Mark Pilkington's book of the same title. Great book. Check that shit out if you're interested. We'll touch on some of this stuff in this overview, but I wanted to get into a couple specific CIA stuff that was weird. What we had previously talked about is like, there's a bunch of weird Cold War tactics that our government and the military used in sort of massaging the public's perception of UFOs. And another thing that comes up a lot when we talk about this stuff, it's hard not to. We talk about the bizarre disinformation campaign that was specifically waged against Paul Benowitz. Like they targeted a guy specifically for basically psychological operations.
Yeah.
And without seeming like, it feels almost crass to say this about just this guy's life, but I do kind of think that you can sort of look at what happened to Paul Benowitz as almost like this canary in the coal mine for intelligence interference in the UFO scene. And that's not to say that it wasn't suspected before Benowitz's case. Like you can pretty well like point back to famous cases in the history of UFOs as possible points of contact between UFO true believers or abductees, and then also the likes of like military intelligence and the CIA.
Right.
Even like off the top of my head, the one that comes to mind, the famous original abduction case of Benny and Barney Hill, that has the stink of like military intelligence and stuff all over it. So we've talked about this stuff a bit, but I realize we haven't really looked at it from the perspective of the CIA.
Yeah, because wasn't Barney Hill like an organizer for leftist movements and stuff?
They were
both of them were okay.
They were both involved with like leftist organizing, if I remember correctly. Actually, I need to jump over. This is a weird aside, but I'm gonna jump over to our It Gets Weird Blue Sky account real quick because we have a listener. If it'll load. Oh no, this is like the worst possible time for Blue Sky to just not load. Okay. Well, anyways, we have a listener whose name I'm not going to remember off the top of my head, who pointed out that like there is like it's important to talk about Betty and Barney Hill, not only from that angle of like intelligence being concerned with like subversiveness because they were sort of, if I remember correctly, I think they were like maybe communists. Like they were at least sympathizers.
So
yeah, there's some stuff to suggest that, but they were pointing out like there's also sort of a racial aspect to that, and how it's handled. That's important. I'll have to remember to bring this up in the next episode. What this listener said to me, because they also here's a quick aside, Niall. Mm-hmm. They have identified the white thing, the cryptid we talked about a few weeks ago. They figured it out.
Great. Okay.
And I would like to share that with you, but Blue Sky is literally broken right now as I'm doing this.
Yeah, they weren't ready to have people actually use that website.
I guess so.
So it's had some troubles.
So anyways, yeah. So what I found was there's a pretty well-known document called The CIA's Role in the Study of UFOs, 1947 to 1990. And it's written by a guy named Gerald K. Haynes. And what I was able to glean about Haynes is that he was a historian and archivist for a bunch of alphabet agency shit. So he was like with the NSA, but he was also with the National Archives FBI task force. And at the time that he wrote this article, he was the official historian for the National Reconnaissance Office. And the article, a lot of the information that I found that I was able to jump off of, it comes from volume 1, number 1 of the journal Studies in Intelligence from 1997. And it's funny because, yeah, NSA, FBI, it's like, I immediately get so like skeeved out when I like discover somebody who's like writing about this stuff is from one of those organizations. But at the same time, it's like the FBI, I feel like almost like they butt heads with the CIA. So like I can kind of also see, you know, them giving like a legitimate analysis of CIA documents.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say, but like it seems pretty well. I mean, what this guy seems to have done is like archived a bunch of documents and like gone through memos and all kinds of shit to write this up. And it's interesting. So a lot of the stuff that they talk about in this article from the late 1940s to mid 50s period, it's stuff we're pretty familiar with. It's hard not to like preamble some of these things with like just saying, yeah, it's like between the seminal UFO sighting of Kenneth Arnold in 1947, where everything sort of begins, and then the infamous Robertson panel in 1953, shit was going down. And we've seen how the military intelligence and government and stuff reacted to that. The CIA was also keeping pretty close tabs on the emerging issue of UFOs. Again, it almost goes without saying that Cold War tensions had people paranoid around the country at all these different organizations. But the CIA, and for reasons that I will eventually get into in another big CIA-related episode, the CIA was so... We have also talked about this, but the CIA was so internally fucked from like communist paranoia that it's like they just appear insane at times, just completely unhinged. It's a lot of why that led to the sort of panels that also took place that I'm forgetting the names of in the early 70s, where they start to question the validity of the CIA's methods.
Yeah, maybe them being left unchecked with basically unlimited funds was not the greatest idea.
Yeah, and like, there's some question about like them like fucking watching, like trying, basically overseeing coups around the world and then high-fiving when they fucking pull them off. And there's all kinds of shit that is just like so suspect. So yeah, it's the Cold War. The CIA is also interested in UFOs, sort of. It's like I said, it's well known that the U.S. Air Force intelligence had various UFO projects like Sign, Grudge, and then ultimately Blue Book. But it should be noted that the CIA was there too. So with the increase of UFO sightings that was happening in this period between 1947 and the like mid 1950s, peaking around 1952, they are, like so many other organizations, concerned about the potential security threat of whatever these things are. Now, and I think we brought this up in an episode at one point, but like in 1952, the CIA is like corresponding between these different organizations. They refer to, and I believe this is in reference to the DC flyover incident. They call it midsummer madness. They're like, is this just people going crazy in the heat of the summer?
Yeah.
Which like I kind of understand. You're out there sweating and suddenly you're hearing about blips on like radars and in amidst like nuclear war tensions. I kind of get it.
Yeah, like mass hysteria is a powerful thing, and if the power of suggestion mixed with heat exhaustion could probably lead to a lot of things. But I don't know if that's fully the explanation I would go with,
Yeah. And so like the Air Force is, as we know, sort of like looking into this stuff and mostly just concluding over and over again, like there's nothing here. But in a CIA memo, they basically say that like, well, we agree with that. But quote, since there is a remote possibility that they may be interplanetary aircraft, it is necessary to investigate each sighting, end quote. Which, let me just unpack that for a second, because what they're saying here is that the chance of it being extraterrestrial or whatever is absurdly remote. But like so much of like their decision making, like during MK Ultra and stuff, it's like no matter how remote the chance, we still don't want to take the chance. Doesn't matter how absurd, we nonetheless investigate or handle it.
It's better to waste a lot of time and money on something that has an almost infinitesimal % chance of being true, than to just not investigate it.
It's like, so you have this like paranoia, right? This like McCarthyism shit that's like kind of welling up, and it's it's like it almost feels multiple parts like that paranoia and like duty to country type stuff that you've convinced yourself of. It also kind of reads half the time of like, this just like legitimizes our work. Even if we're researching an absurd thing or investigating an absurd thing, like the fact that we're doing it means that like our work is real and matters. It's it's I don't know. It's a weird era, I think, to be working for a government agency. So
when isn't?
Yeah, fair enough.
I started thinking about like right now, it's probably fucking weird as shit.
That's fair. That's very fair. So it's like 1952, and there's a bunch of sightings of UFOs. So the CIA reacts to this by forming the Office of Scientific Intelligence and the Office of Current Intelligence. So OSI and OCI. Which I can't see OSI without thinking of the Venture Brothers. So
gotta get your speed suits ready.
Yeah. So a lot of these people, they've got Edward Taus, who is the chief of OSI's Weapons and Equipment Division, and he's sort of reporting like so many other people that like all of this can be explained. There's no, like UFOs are not that mysterious for the most part. Notoriously, I think it was Project Blue Book who, like, in their reports were saying 90% of this stuff can be explained. 10% were like unsure, and they're sort of extraordinary cases, but they would like usually reach for some sort of like, well, this is an understudied like atmospheric phenomenon or whatever, but we can't like 100% confirm what's happening with this case. But what Taus ends up doing is he then tells the agency like we should just keep following the UFO situation, and they coordinate with a group called the Advanced Technical Intelligence Center. It's like a school that I believe still exists, and they basically make the same conclusions that the Air Force makes, which is don't let the media or the public know that we have any interest in following any of this. Hide it. Cover it up.
Yeah.
This is, quote, in view of their probable alarmist tendencies. So, like, they're worried that they're going to create mass panic and alarm. And it would confirm that UFOs are real.
That's a pretty common thread of like, at some point, I feel like the threat of mass panic is more of a justification than an actual thing. It's like a reason. It's a pretty easy reason to cite for hiding anything you want.
Yeah, yeah. See, from my perspective, if I were like head of the CIA or whatever, director of Central Intelligence, I'd be like, maybe we try a little mass panic. Maybe we just test it out, dip our toes, and see how that goes. Maybe we just put out a report that says UFOs are real and they might be aliens. And shit, I'm realizing there's something I'm forgetting.
Yeah, they kind of did that.
That's kind of sort of a thing that's happening. Well, anyways, I would try out the mass panic route. I think I would try and sow chaos probably. So the deputy director for intelligence is Robert Amory Jr. Robert Amory. God, why do these people have such weird names? He gets assigned to investigate UFOs with OSI. And they like basically assign every single branch in this particular division. They say you all have to contribute research to this UFO stuff. And again, they're all still coordinating with this ATIC group.
Okay.
And their concern is about national security. So like the director of Central Intelligence at the time, Walter Bedell Smith, is the one who's sort of like telling them like national security is our main goal here. We want to make sure that there's no threat from outside the US, from within, we want to make sure we know what this is so we can confirm or deny the like importance to security. They also wanted to sort of like the article says that they were trying to make sure that the Air Force was, quote, sufficiently objective about it, which, like, when I read that, I feel it feels kind of stupid to me. Like, I don't know how objective can you actually get about something like this? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it seems like an impossible task, but they're just like, I guess what they're trying to say is like, are you taking all the data and analyzing it and crunching the numbers and doing the math and blah, blah, or whatever the fuck they see as objective? Like, I think that's what they mean, but it's a weird thing to try and levy into a flying saucer investigation, because it seems to me that nothing in a flying saucer related report or story could to truly be objective in the way that they sort of are thinking here. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I'm saying, but
see, I when you said that, my first thought was, you got to be sufficiently objective, aka, cover up.
Well, sure, yeah, maybe that's definitely the case when the Robertson panel stuff starts happening. But yeah, that's also probably part of it. Is like, yeah, cover it up.
Objective means aliens aren't real. You know that.
Yeah, true. Well, now they're asking, like, how much more do we need to, like, they're like, how much more money and manpower do we need to, like, confirm all this shit? Because there's still, according to these various organizations, like something like 10% of unexplained flying saucer cases. And Smith, the director, says, quote, that he believed that, quote, there was only one chance in 10,000 that the phenomenon posed a threat to the security of the country, but even that chance could not be taken. So again, back to the whole, doesn't matter how astronomical the odds are of this being legitimate, we still don't take that chance.
Right.
So they also, specifically Smith as director at the CIA, wanted to know what the psychological warfare implications of the UFO phenomenon were. And so they get all these organizations, this CIA study group, they meet with Air Force officials at Wright-Patterson, and they start to compare data. And again, this is where they get in what I mentioned earlier. 90% of the reported sightings were easily explained.
Mm-hmm.
10% were described as, quote, a number of incredible reports from credible observers. Now the Air Force doesn't believe that this stuff is like Soviet spy planes or secret weapons or anything. They agree that none of this involves, quote, men from Mars. No evidence of any of that. And like I said, everything that didn't fall in that 90% was some sort of misinterpretation of data or unknown phenomenon that was natural.
Right.
But this is also when the Air Force and the CIA, when they come together to have this discussion about this stuff, they agree that like any outside like interference or interest in this phenomenon and our personal involvement in we can't. It's too serious for the public to know about. So this is, again, we've covered a lot of this, but this is like when the cover up stuff really starts to amplify, because like people start to realize that shit's going down, but they're being very secretive about it. They don't want the public to know about it. You know, people are like aggressively, like the media is aggressive about reporting these things. Eventually we'll get to the point where people like Donald Kehoe, who we covered in a couple episodes, are basically harassing different government agencies and stuff about these things. Like Kehoe, if you remember, he kind of had a hard on for the CIA specifically.
Yeah. So
it gets hard. Like
he would have loved the Freedom of Information Act, you know?
Yeah. It's so They one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting here is that this study group that the CIA formed then looked to the Soviet Union to be like, well, what have they found about UFOs? And they ended up finding absolutely nothing. There are no reports for them to find. There's no, like, they couldn't get any intelligence on the Soviet Union's, like, opinion or data on UFOs. Now, they suspect that this is probably the result of policy in the Soviet Union at the time, which I can't speak too deeply on that, but I guess what they mean is, like, the Soviet Union probably did not release any information. If they had any, it was just fucking locked away, is I think the idea here. But they're thinking, like, okay, how can we use UFOs as psychological warfare? How can they use UFOs as psychological warfare? Like, that concern, I think, takes primacy over, like, whether or not it's some sort of, like, actual weapon. The question becomes, like, how can, like, they are deeply concerned with, like I said, massaging public perception of things. But that can work both ways. Like, can the USSR, like, massage the information over here to freak the public out or whatever, do some sort of psychological warfare against us using this information?
So this is like where the foundation of some of the theories on, like, Roswell being a fake craft sent by the Soviets to crash and cause panic.
Yes.
The root of a lot of those things.
They straight up are concerned that if the Soviets were able to actually manipulate public opinion to the point of, like, in triggering, mass hysteria or whatever, they were like, if they were able to do that, then we would have like a weak point, an opening for a nuclear attack. Like, they could get us while hysteria is like, while we're trying to, like, rein that in.
Go schmo.
Yeah, they're going to attack us. That's the idea here.
Okay.
So, like I said, this is all pretty reminiscent of the conclusions the Air Force seemed to come to, and it seems by most accounts that the CIA tended to agree with them during this, like, particular onslaught of UFO flaps between 1947 to 1953 or so. And like I said, this all leads to the Robertson panel, another thing we've discussed in depth before, so I'm not going to get too deep on it. But it must be said that the CIA backed this team of scientists who formed the Robertson panel. They send these scientists to investigate the UFO information and the data they've collected and all this stuff. And what they wanted to do, the CIA wanted to draft up a National Security Council intelligence directive. They wanted to put together this directive based on the findings of the panel. But after the panel basically concludes that UFOs are nothing, they scrap the directive. They're like, you know what, we're not making a directive about UFOs. The short and skinny of what was decided from the Robertson panel's findings was that UFOs just needed to be debunked in the name of national security. And for the CIA, that UFOs as a subject would kind of be put on the back burner in the, like, mid 50s. And I was reading it, and apparently at one point they, like, at one point they basically take all their UFO shit and give it to one guy in the CIA, and they're like, you're like the singular person behind the task force for UFO stuff. And it basically is just like, he wants nothing to do with it. Nobody wants to deal with fucking UFOs. It was a similar thing in the Air Force where, like, generally speaking, people are like, UFOs, fuck that. We're not that interested. But because there's such a overwhelming interest from the public, they feel compelled to do something.
Which always generates the best work. When the people that want to do it have actual
just
resentment
don't give a
for the
fuck.
people asking for it.
And like, so it transforms from this thing of, like, whoa, what are these weird stories coming in through the media and through people having these weird experiences? Is it a national security threat to, okay, we've looked over the data like a fucking ton of times. It's nothing that we can't explain. Fuck this, we're out. But people are just endlessly knocking at their door about it. Like you can actually kind of picture the X-Files here with like UFO related information getting stashed away in a locker in some basement because nobody at the CIA actually wants to deal with it. The hilarious irony of this all, though, is for the next couple decades, UFOs seem to want to continue dealing with the CIA. That's kind of how this goes. So here's where things start getting. I almost did the thing where you say the title of the movie in the movie.
People love that. You should do it. That's where things get weird.
I try not to do that, but this is where it gets weird. November 1954. We touched on this in the Sidney Gottlieb series that I did, I believe, where the CIA is involved with the development of the high-tech U2 project. So
when they put the album on my phone?
Yeah, I think you made that joke the other
probably.
time too.
It's right there, but
it's good. It's good. So yeah, they're now involved with the development of U2s. And this is in collaboration with Lockheed's Advanced Development Facility, which is out in California, but is, I think, better known as Skunk Works.
Right, yeah.
And they are working with this guy, Kelly Johnson, an engineer. And by 1955, they're able to test this high-altitude experimental craft. It could fly at about 60,000 feet. So around 1955, like commercial airliners, those things are getting up to between 10,000 and 20,000 feet. So this is the advent of a new era of like high altitude aircraft. And you find that once they start testing this U2 shit, they get lots more UFO reports, believe it or not.
Makes sense.
So I guess these early experimental versions of the U2 were actually silver in color. And because they were this silver color, they would reflect sunlight. At sunrise and sunset, they would be especially like vibrant in the sky, but they're also way higher. So people who would see them would report almost like fiery objects when they saw them sort of with the sunlight glinting off of them.
Okay, yeah.
Now, Air Force's Project Blue Book is happening at this point, and the people involved with Blue Book are, of course, aware that there are these secret flights of this experimental aircraft called the U-2. They know that this is happening, but they're nonetheless still investigating UFO reports. So they're getting UFO reports. It's again more people knocking at the door of these agencies, asking what the fuck is going on. I saw a fireball that flew at inhuman speeds. And Blue Book's like, fuck. They saw the U-2. What do we do? Of course, you tell them that it's fucking stupid shit that nobody buys. The temperature inversion stuff, weather balloons.
Okay, yeah.
It's all that. Like, I forget which specifically was the temperature inversion one. It may have been, I forget which one that was specifically, but like they would roll out these explanations knowing full well that like, well, we've checked the flight paths and the data. They saw experimental aircraft. They can't know that, so we'll just tell them it's a temperature inversion.
Yeah. All right.
So they were actually, I guess, Blue Book was running by the CIA, asking them about stuff, and that's how they were able to get information about the fact that these were definitely U-2 sightings. So they have the U-2 project. There's a couple other projects that succeed the U-2, like there's one called Oxcart. There's also Project Blackbird. We don't like need to get into the details of the different planes, but they were like spy planes and stuff.
I know that. So the Blackbird is the like, I mean, it's the one that looks like a black flat.
I think so. Yeah.
But I don't know Oxcart at all. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, what they find while the CIA is like is involved with these projects to develop these secret craft, they discover that like the estimate for how many UFO sightings could be attributed to these secret projects, the data somewhere about a little over 50%.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's got to be pretty extensive, right?
Yeah. So as a result, you have the Air Force who are being like brazenly deceptive, like extremely obviously, blowing smoke up people's asses, because, they're considering this stuff like Oxcart and Blackbird to be highly sensitive, classified stuff, security stuff. Right.
National security, all that shit.
But between all these fucking people being so secretive and weird about this stuff, this is like the stuff that will then fuel all the conspiracy theories and the UFO cover-up conspiracy that would really like metastasize into the 1970s. So what's kind of interesting, I'd never seen this before, but the Air Force, you know how I said like 10% of the cases are inexplicable or whatever. Over time, throughout the mid 1950s, that percentage dropped to 5.9% from their estimations, and then down to 4%.
Okay.
So over time, they were like, actually, we've been able to figure out more of this stuff. I feel like I've seen the 10% number thrown around by people online before, like ufologists and stuff. But yeah. I've never seen somebody bring up that they had like internal memos saying that like this number dropped drastically by like multiple percents.
That 10% thing gets thrown around a lot, that I still see it. So it is interesting to see that they were like, oh, we actually figured out more of these things.
Now, they had conducted the Robertson panel, which, like I said, was sort of like them saying, we need to debunk UFOs. We need people to shut the fuck up. But the Robertson panel's findings and stuff was classified at the time. I've mentioned how Edward Ruppelt, who was once with the Air Force on Blue Book, he had sort of revealed that the panel had taken place, that this was like a committee that existed. And so people are like, well, fuck. They keep, it's almost like, sometimes it's almost like they are intentionally doing things to fuck things up to make people more paranoid that a cover-up's happening. Because in a sense, a cover-up is happening. It's just not for the reasons people think.
They're so devoted to saying nothing that it like is just fucking, yeah, they're making it worse.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And it doesn't help when Ruppelt just comes out and he's just like, yeah, so me and the secret, UFO research group, we did in fact have a panel to research the findings of UFO data, and oops, I guess that's out there now. So this is when Donald Kehoe comes in, who we discussed at length in multiple episodes a while back. But the short version is that he is an ex-Marine who became a ufologist, he's like kind of the first celebrity ufologist, really. He did a lot of writing on UFOs. He began to be, a prominent UFO cover-up conspiracy guy. And he was also, so like we have these civilian UFO groups that are forming around this time, such as National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And Donald Kehoe is for a while a like the director of NICAP, I do believe. So these organizations start to pressure the Air Force and all these other groups about UFOs and declassification of information surrounding UFOs and the Robertson panel. The Deputy Assistant Director of the Office of Scientific Intelligence, Philip Strong, at the time, flat out refused to declassify the Robertson panel.
Okay.
And also especially didn't want to disclose the CIA's sponsorship of the panel. And so what they do is the CIA they draft up a censored or rather sanitized version of the actual Robertson panel report and omit any reference to the CIA having any involvement, and they omit any reference to the CIA taking interest in the potential of psychological warfare in the UFO phenomenon. But so they released this report that, like, I think people must have just immediately realized is like missing information.
Yeah.
It's nothing. Yeah. I think I've actually read the sanitized report myself forever ago. So people are like, the problem of like the potential of a cover up is ramping the fuck up.
For people whose main job it is to lie, they're not the best at lying.
It's funny because, like, oh God, we can't get into this now, but
okay.
Sometimes the way it feels to me is that they really do try and like let out certain true things and hold back all the other stuff. Like,
yeah, very selective.
The limited hangout aspect of this stuff, which is like more of a concept later in, like, I want to say the, like, after Watergate, but we that's too far in the weeds now. I can't talk about it right now.
That's a whole other episode.
Not to get too spoil. I'm literally reading a book about the sort of like bizarre methodology of the CIA at this time. Like, I'm reading that right now, so eventually we'll get into it.
All right.
So Kehoe in 1958, and I think we talked about some of this. He has an interview with Mike Wallace on CBS, and that's where the big fallout of him being like, the CIA has deep involvement with UFOs, and he, I think, also outs the possibility of the CIA sponsoring the Robertson panel. And so the CIA then ends up writing a series of letters. Kehoe writes the agency. Kehoe writes to the CIA. He's also joined by fellow ufologist Dr. Leon Davidson. And they're also, knock, 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 show us the Robertson panel, declassify this stuff. We want to know how the CIA is involved in UFOs.
Okay.
And what's interesting is Davidson specifically believed, and I think Kehoe too, were both pretty adamant that the CIA was way more involved than the Air Force actually was in this like cover-up aspect. Now, because they're ufologists and because of who Donald Kehoe is, they're sort of like, they're coming at it from the extraterrestrial hypothesis angle of like, we know alien life exists and we're covering it up.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is they're not wrong that it's being covered up. They just don't know about Oxcart and U2s and shit.
They're just, the direction is wrong.
Yeah. So the Air Force meets with the CIA, and they're like, what do we say to people like Kehoe and Davidson, because they are constantly writing us letters and being public nuisances about UFOs to us?
Hell yeah.
There's another weird aspect to it where Kehoe is working closely with the former director of Central Intelligence, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter. This guy's so weird. He actually was like one of the board of governors for NICAP alongside Kehoe at a certain point. And so this former intelligence guy is working with NICAP, and the CIA is like, Jesus Christ, a former director is like working with the guy who's harassing us about UFOs, and we're trying to cover up our involvement in these secret projects. A CIA officer actually in a memo notes that, or suggests that Davidson might have, quote, ulterior motives, quote, some of them perhaps not in the best interest of his country, which I think is to say that he's sort of suggesting maybe the guy's a communist is my guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to like also egg on the FBI to investigate. Now, Hillenkoetter, he serves with NICAP from 1957 to 1962 and was actually a Naval Academy classmate of Donald Kehoe's. So we have two like ex-military, ex-intelligence guys who are out there making a fucking racket about UFOs. Notably, Hillenkoetter in 1960 was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense." Now, we don't know if the FBI actually ever got involved here. They were talking about, one of the things that was floated was like, well, okay, we have this ex-intelligence guy, Hillenkoetter, on NICAP, this civilian agency to harass us about UFOs. Maybe what we do is we show him the Robertson panel to get him to chill the fuck out. Just him.
And that'll be the end of it. What do you mean?
We don't know if they actually ever did that. There's no information or memo or anything to suggest that they actually did that. But in 1962, Hillenkoetter ends up resigning from NICAP. Now, there's a couple other bizarre cases that the CIA ended up getting involved with that also pertained to Kehoe and Davidson. We only have time for one here, but we'll get into another in part 2. Okay. This is a story I'd never heard before. That's very strange. So on August 23rd, 1954, the technology magazine Aviation Week and Space Technology, they release a story that I guess was pretty, like so many UFO stories, it caused a stir at the time.
Okay.
And I guess Pentagon officials were pissed off about this story. We have one paragraph in the Washington Roundup that said, quote, "Pentagon scare over the observance of two previously unobserved satellites orbiting the Earth has dissipated with the identification of the objects as natural, not artificial satellites." So they get this guy, Dr. Lincoln La Paz, who is, the website I was reading this on calls him an expert on extraterrestrial bodies from the University of New Mexico. I think that just means he's a ufologist, honestly. He is like a part of this project to identify what these celestial bodies are that were like in Earth's orbit.
Is this Black Knight satellite related?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
At least I don't think so. So one of these satellites are orbiting about 400 miles out from Earth, and the other one is 600 miles from the Earth. And the concern among intelligence people and, you know, the Pentagon, I guess, and they thought, shit, the Russians beat us to space. Which, like, if you remember, we've also discussed this a number of times on the show where, like, the space race was a dick measuring contest. The Soviets were, like, actually kind of ahead of us. So the go to the moon was, like, a bit of a, like, fuck you, like, we're America type thing.
And it was plan B after possibly trying to blow up, like, nuke the moon.
Yeah, so
that's still one of my favorite episodes I've ever gotten to do. That
it's a whole weird, stupid series of events, the space race. And so there, this report of these like orbiting entities, whatever they are, is weird and concerning as far as like public perception of the United States is like position in the space race. Because like if they aren't natural bodies, if they're like Soviet satellites or whatever, we've lost. Is the idea.
Right.
So the New York Times, the day after this, They write their own version of the story, and now the story has spread of these like 2 orbiting satellites. Some people, of course, because of the era we're in, think that these may not have been natural objects. They were sort of arguing that the idea that 2 asteroids, which is sort of the story they're running with, were captured by the gravitational field of Earth at the same time is like impossible, like statistically so impossible is kind of the idea, I think. I don't know how impossible that actually is, but that's what some of the UFO believers were running with, I guess. So
okay,
they're thinking that they're artificial objects, and they might have something to do with Mars. It's a little unclear. Like they think that they're UFOs. Okay, I'll cut to the chase. They think that they're UFOs. Yeah. And so November 28th, 1954, the radio station WGN in Chicago, they start to have a discussion about these 2 mysterious satellites. And Jim Mills, who is the host of that show, had a guest on for the day who is the ufologist John Otto. Now, there are, I guess, CIA documents that sort of paint John Otto pretty negatively in the fallout of this story. And John Otto comes on this radio show with an idea to try and communicate with these satellites, which he thinks might be UFOs.
Okay.
So what they do is they're like, at 11:15 p.m. on the dot on this radio show, their plan is to attempt to send a signal to these orbiting satellites and then listen for a possible response from extraterrestrials. And they do exactly that. So this guy, John Otto, comes on, and right at 11:15 p.m., 10 minutes later, at 11:25 p.m., they cut all sound and they just broadcast the message, "Come in outer space." Now, what they wanted to happen was aliens would tap into the transmitter that they were using on the radio show, and that all radio listeners in the area would hear the response from the aliens. As a result, people who were listening to the radio program were like basically being told, you should record this because you're about to capture, for posterity, alien communication. Now they broadcast this message and they waited. Would you believe it? Nothing came over the radio.
Huh. So aliens weren't able to immediately hijack an entire broadcast system.
No.
That they probably didn't even hear if they were out there.
And both Mills and Otto, after the show is done, they leave the studio. And when they leave the studio, listener calls start coming in. So they get 4 calls from people who claim that they actually heard an alien message. And it's people in like the Chicago area calling in and being like, no, we recorded something. And they had they believe they had weird messages from like ham radio operators in the area who think they picked something up. So in 1955, we begin the radio code incident. So these 2 sisters in Chicago, Mildred and Mary Meyer, they write in the Journal of Spaceflight that they have experiences with UFOs, and one of those experiences was recording a radio program where they picked up an unidentified code. And these 2 sisters had taped that program, and they believed that what they picked up was this quote-unquote space message. Now, the OSI hears about this, and they ask the scientific contact branch to get a copy of the recording. So field officers from the CIA's contact division, which I'm assuming what that is like people who do field work and go and contact subjects and stuff. I think that's what that is. One of the officers, DeWelt Walker, gets in contact with the Meyer sisters, who were reportedly, quote, thrilled that the government was interested, and they decide to meet with the officers. Now, the CIA officers are trying to get this recording from these two women.
Mm-hmm.
And what they report is that when they get... What they had actually found was, I guess, a recording of a scene from Arsenic and Old Lace.
So was it like so I used to have a thing where whenever I tried to record, I would have to ground everything really well in my old house in Indianapolis, because it would pick up various like AM radio frequencies that would cut through into like my direct box. So were they picking up some other station that was playing Arsenic and Old Lace or something?
Maybe that might be what it is. I actually don't have the specifics in front of me about what had happened on a technical level, but that sounds right.
I was trying to record a metal album, and I kept getting the local Latin pop station.
You told me about that. Yeah,
that would come through. So if you have, I'll just say this: if you have your effects set up for like distorted metal guitars, like chugging guitars, and then all of a sudden you start hearing like Latin pop ads being put through that same effects chain, it sounds really fucking weird.
It sounds like it might be kind of cool.
Yeah.
So Walker, this CIA officer, sends a memo to CIA HQ that reportedly in it he says, quote, "The only thing lacking was the elderberry wine." And he ends up getting to review like a scrapbook of like the lives of these two sisters, and they get a copy of the recording of this like radio signal. And what they actually find is that I just misread that. Yeah. Wow, I misread a bunch of that. Sorry, that's written so weird that I didn't realize what I was reading until now. Sorry, what this article was saying is that the scene of meeting the sisters was like Arsenic and Old Lace.
Oh.
I thought it was saying that they picked up a recorded message. Okay, my confusion there, I feel stupid. What actually they picked up, now that I'm realizing what I'm reading, what they had actually picked up after the OSI analyzed it was Morse code that they had just intercepted from a radio station.
Oh, okay.
Now,
a little less fun than like I was about to, is Arsenic Old? I don't know who wrote Arsenic Old Lace.
But it's written in such a bizarre way. Here's what it literally said in the article.
It's saying the only thing missing from the whole scene was the elderberry wine, which I'm sure is a thing in Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yeah, it says, quote, "In trying to secure the tape recording, the agency officers reported that they had stumbled upon a scene from Arsenic and Old Lace."
Oh,
so I thought it was, oh God, I feel stupid. Forgive me. So it was a weird little incident, right? Where like they intercept Morse code, which is itself kind of odd in this story. And nothing would have come of it if it weren't for the fact that a ufologist named Leon Davidson ended up talking to the Meyer sisters in 1957. And when he talks to them, the sisters tell him, yeah, we talked to this guy, Mr. Walker, from the U.S. Air Force. And that leads this ufologist, Davidson, to find and write to this Mr. Walker guy. And he was operating as if Walker was operating as if he was a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer at Wright-Patterson. And Davidson writes this guy asking him if they had analyzed the tape that they had picked up Morse code on. Walker then goes gets back in contact with Davidson and says, "Oh yeah, the tape's been forwarded to the authorities. We have no information about the results." And Davidson's like, "Fuck you! I think you're a Fed. I think you're a CIA officer." And he writes him back, and he then also writes to Alan Dulles, who at the time was the director of Central Intelligence, who, by the way, we went deep on his pet project with Sidney Gottlieb and MKUltra. So Dulles oversaw a lot of that stuff. And they wanted to know what the Morse code message actually was. And who is this Mr. Walker guy who is, in fact, a secret, like a CIA agent who is basically disguising himself as an Air Force officer.
Okay.
So the CIA gets back in touch with Davidson, and they're like, so another agency in the government has analyzed the tape, and you will probably hear from the Air Force. So then later, the Air Force then writes to Davidson, and they tell him, oh yeah, no, that Walker guy is an Air Force officer, 100% confirmed with us. That guy is not CIA at all. But the tape that you're asking about was, quote, analyzed by another government organization. And they then say that the Morse code that you heard came from a known U.S. licensed radio station. So Davidson gets back in contact with Dulles, and he's like, okay, who is the person operating the Morse code that they picked up? Like, what, if it's known, like, what is it? I'd also like to know about the agency that conducted the analysis of the tape. And what happens now is the CIA and the Air Force realize that they had denied that they had analyzed the tape. And the Air Force had denied it as well. And then they had also claimed that Walker was an Air Force officer. They're basically confirming accidentally, by mishandling this, the suspicions of Davidson, that this guy is an undercover CIA officer and that the tape actually might have something on it that's of interest. They contradict one another by being both in contact with him. So another CIA officer is sent undercover to contact Davidson in Chicago.
Okay.
And they tell him, hey, look, we're going to get the code translated. We're going to identify who transmitted it. We'll let you know. Davidson doesn't let him go. And then they send another CIA officer who is also undercover as an Air Force officer. And he meets up with Davidson in New York City and tells him there's no super agency involved. Air Force policy is actually to not disclose who is doing what. And Davidson's like, okay, fair enough. But like, you should tell me who recorded this message and who broadcast it. And the officer's like, see what I can do. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
He checks with CIA HQ, and then he phones back to Davidson and says, okay, we did a thorough check of the tape, and we checked it's of U.S. origin. However, the tape and the notes that you are interested in have actually been destroyed to conserve file space.
Okay.
So Davidson,
that's a new one.
Davidson's fucking pissed because he's not only getting the runaround, but now they're telling him actually it's all gone now. And Davidson said, I guess told the CIA officer, quote, he and his agency, whichever it was, were acting like Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamster Union in destroying records which might indict them. The CIA and the Air Force are like, well, if we keep talking to this guy, it's only going to get worse for us. This is fucked. What do we do? They all come to the conclusion, just ignore him. And they do. And it works. They basically like kind of talk amongst themselves like, what do we do about this guy? We've handled this situation so badly, and it fueled, again, more conspiracy about the CIA and the Air Force involved in cover-ups.
How many of these meetings do you think they've had to have of like, we got to just stop? We gotta just ignore this guy?
The amount of meetings that they had about one of the correspondences with this guy alone had to have been at least a dozen. Like, like somebody somewhere, there was miscommunication, and it was so fucked up that they just out themselves. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So
Jesus. All right.
That is just part one. I have a whole bunch more shit to tell you about. That's fun and interesting. But this whole UFO program to contact extraterrestrial entities that are orbiting the Earth that the Pentagon is pissed about because it looks like we lost a space race, resulting in a guy haranguing the CIA and the Air Force into accidentally outing themselves, covering up this weird Morse code tape. Hilarious.
Yeah, like that.
It's insane.
It is such a comedy of errors, and like you can tell that like there was just a blanket position of just like, we can't give out a lot of information and we can't deny, we got to obfuscate. And they did it so much that it actually like laid their entire hand bare. And that's absolutely wild. I'd never heard that story before.
It was a new one for me as well. I had never heard the Meyer sisters, but I was like kind of looking into that. It's not like a super long story, the like radio signal thing, but the Meyer sisters have that flavor of like, if you could dive into the microfiche in Chicago, you could probably find a bunch of weird info about these people. It would probably be very interesting. Yeah. But that's going to be part 1 for me. I have some more CIA related UFO stuff, and all of this will dovetail into an episode I've been teasing for like months now of like the craziness that is the CIA from like the 50s to the 70s, because it's fucking nuts. I mean, we've already touched on a lot of it, but I have another big crazy one that's coming down the pipe.
Look, you found your kind of your rabbit hole for a while here. You've been pecking away at this for a while.
And I love when bureaucracy comes back to bite these people in the ass. To like it seems to happen not that more often than you would expect, and it's always funny. And it's even funnier when UFOs are involved. So,
exactly.
Niall, are you ready for a big question?
As always, I'm ready for a big question.
Okay. If you could broadcast a message that you knew both the CIA and extraterrestrials would hear, what would it be?
Do I have any limitations on like length?
I'm going to go ahead and say no, because you could send them the entire script of B-movie, or you could send them something as simple as "You Up."
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain simplicity to something similar to something like "You Up," where you're just like, they would think about that. It's kind of like the like the wow message or whatever the fuck. Like,
yes, yeah.
Those things where sometimes something that's more mundane is actually more mysterious. That's true. Because there's nothing to go on,
Yeah, well, imagine you're out in space and you receive a signal from the outer reaches of space, and you can confirm without a doubt that it's from way beyond the stars, and you have some sort of machine that interprets the message for you, and it literally just says, "Hey."
Yeah.
That would be fucked up.
That would be.
That'd be pretty fucked up.
But I think my actual answer is going to be a little bit different, and this is just because, I this is really stupid, but I was laying in bed last night listening to music, as I've started doing sometimes, because it's like I don't spend enough time just like sitting with albums that I really like. And I re-listened to Slint's Spiderland in the dark with headphones on, with nothing else happening.
Okay.
And that is like probably the best way to listen to that album. And I go recommend it to anyone who hasn't done that. But I think I would just want to broadcast the song Washer by Slint.
Okay.
Because for some reason, I literally just like randomly tweeted. You'll find it on Blue Sky if you follow me. I just tweeted, "Is that the greatest song ever recorded?" And like, I know we've tried to do the whole gold record thing before. We've tried to like send out things to alien entities to kind of give an idea of humanity. But I think that a lot of that stuff's bullshit. Sure. And a lot of the art that's on there is like not nearly as good as Washer by Slint.
I was going to say, if it's Washer by Slint, now we're talking. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that. I'm going to go a different route that kind of is stupid in comparison to yours, if that's
great.
Okay. It's sort of a bit, but I would probably send them the 5 people you meet in heaven, the entire text of that book. It just, did I just say that I haven't read it? Or did I just say
Not
that
yet.
Now? Well, I guess
you
I just
you
did
just
now.
said that you just kind of outed yourself. Yeah. Name one of the people.
Edit this out, Niall.
No.
That book really
I'll edit it
out. Book really helped me in a difficult time, and I feel like the CIA, the ETs who are here to dominate the human species, could use an uplifting story about what it's like. Like, honestly, what I'm really trying to impart are the experience of Colton Burpo. If you remember the kid who died and went to heaven and came back, and he was like, I don't remember what the kid said. He was probably like, oh, I met Jesus. And
well, it was 5 people, so let's name them off. We know Jesus.
We know Jesus has got to be one, right? Jesus is up.
Yeah, we know. And I remember, the one that I remember is Dale Earnhart Jr.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, in the world of the bit, that's true.
Okay, so Dale Earnhardt Jr.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's 2. Or are you doing Jesus again?
No. I'm
like come back in a funny mustache.
Yeah, Jesus 2. Jesus' Japanese brother is up there.
There we go. There it is.
So those are the first 3. There's 2 more though.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and say, who's the guy who shot himself in the head on live TV?
Bud Dwyer?
Bud Dwyer is up there.
Is that the right name?
Yeah, Bud Dwyer's up there.
Wow, I pulled that. All right.
Bud Dwyer's up there.
Yeah. And then go ahead.
I mean, it's got to be like John Lennon, right?
Sure.
John Lennon and Bud Dwyer are up there hanging out, talking all kinds of hippie shit, politics. And yeah, I think that the kid, Colton Burpo, which I think is what the 5 people you meet in heaven is about, that kid, he goes up there and he gets to see, oh, wow. So suicide does not preclude you from hell. Or maybe Bud Dwyer might not have been Catholic.
Look, it's all that shit's Calvin Ball. It's been reformed many times. All I know is that they probably aren't burying him in a Catholic grave.
That's probably true. So I think they need to lighten up the ETs and the CIA. I think that this can help them.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of nailed down what the 5 people you meet in heaven's about. I don't think we need. I don't think you and I need to read that book. We kind of figured it out live on the podcast.
Well, you already did read it.
Or yeah, I did read
it. But I don't know if is it still child endangerment if you're in heaven? Because like I think having Colton Burpo meet Bud Dwyer is kind of a little reckless.
Is it? It was what did just because Bud Dwyer has a gun, he's got the instrument of his own death up in heaven.
Yeah, you take because you spawn with whatever you have on hand when you die, right?
Yeah. No, I mean anytime there's any child endangering sort of moment in heaven, like big like safe soft balloons pop up and like gently. Like if you were to shove a kid in heaven, a balloon would sort of appear and they'd bounce off it completely unharmed.
Yeah, that's what the clouds are for, right?
Exactly.
Right, okay.
So,
all right.
Wow, that was a weird one, huh?
Yeah. And I'm just imagining John Lennon shredding on a harp.
All right.
That's the image we'll leave it on.
Thank you. You ready to take care of some business, Niall?
Yeah. All right. So if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
We're on all your favorite podcatchers. If you listen to It Gets Weird, if you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're almost certainly there.
You can follow us on Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird, where when we get time, I like to go there and live stream video games, usually with friend of the show, Colin. So if you like the Whole House episode, check out the live stream where we hang out and play games sometimes. We also have a Blue Sky account. I believe it's just itgetsweird.bluesky.com or whatever. So please give us a follow there. I'm trying to use that more than Twitter because I hate that
Twitter
platform's sucks. Terrible. You can also email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com if you want your email read on the show. If you have a cool UFO story, sort of like our friend Turner, please give us an email. We'll snatch that shit up and pour gravy on it and guzzle it down. And we'll read it on the show if you let us know how you want us to address you. We love getting your emails. They're always entertaining. Now, you can also check us out, and this is maybe the most important thing, beyond emails and everything else, patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $1 tier that's just a tip. That's just you saying, hey, thanks for doing your show. Here's $1. We love what you do. But if you want the juicy content, and I know you do, we have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you get access to the show It Gets Weird TV, where right now Niall and I are discussing every other week Neon Genesis Evangelion. You get to vote on what weird show we watch next. We've watched a bunch of other great shows, like multiple seasons of The X-Files. We've watched a season of Supernatural. We've watched all kinds of stuff. Gravity Falls.
Project Blue Book.
We've watched a ton of great stuff and discussed it on that show. Now, at the $5 tier, you're going to get access to that show, plus another show in the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV that right now we are calling World of Weird, where Niall and I talk about whatever the hell we want. It can be fucking anything. If you like our tangents, and I've heard people do like the tangents that we go on these shows, you can basically imagine an hour-long tangent.
Yeah, that's not far off. So far, a lot of talk of Godzilla
and horror movies and music and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So that comes out at the $5 tier. And if you're at the $5 tier, you'll also get access to It Gets Weird TV and all the previous benefits. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, though, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday on your own private Patreon feed. And you get access to the Discord where we're hanging out, chatting about all kinds of stuff with our listeners. You can reach us there directly. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you don't get invited to the Discord and you would like to be invited to the Discord, please contact us through Patreon. And we will set you up. If you can't donate to the show, though, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continuing to support the show. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, and I will see you in the CIA and UFOs Part 2 next week.
Fantastic. All right. Peace.